crew coming out of their crew quarters.
On January 16, 2003, the shuttle Columbia launched with a crew of 7 on a 2-week science mission.
We have booster ignition and liftoff of Space Shuttle Columbia with a multitude of national and international space research experiments.
Columbia, Houston, UHF comm check.
This day has brought terrible news and great sadness to our country.
On the 1st of February 2003, Columbia began its descent back to Earth.
At 9 o'clock this morning, Mission Control in Houston lost contact with our Space Shuttle Columbia.
As the shuttle raced over the Pacific towards the US, the crew put on their suits, preparing themselves for a routine landing. It was now 8:40 a.m., and these are pictures of their last moments alive.
Columbia's a beautiful ship. She's performing magnificently.
A short time later, debris was seen falling from the skies above Texas. The Columbia is lost. There are no survivors.
My God.
1 minute 15.
There's been an explosion.
GC flight. GC flight. Fly GC. Lock the doors. Copy.
Standard. This is not something that is planned, of course.
I was just so angry. I was shocked.
38 miles above ground, the space shuttle had exploded.
In the middle of your screen.
That when we watched those videos of the foam coming off the vehicle, that we could have thought that that was not going to be a problem. How could sensible people, supposedly smart engineers and program managers, make such a terrible decision?
All 7 on board were killed.
I cannot see the shuttle itself.
I was training in Russia on Expedition 8, a space station mission where I would have been up in space for 6 months. I was a backup crew when we heard that we lost the crew of STS-107 in Columbia.
The question was, what had gone wrong?
I was enraged, and I stayed that way for several years when I returned. You know, and they made us stay in Russia and continue training for another week, which I thought was totally crazy. You know, we're not going to be flying in space. The whole space program in the United States changed. The next mission was going to be totally changed. It was going to take us years to determine what caused this problem and to make sure that it never happened again. But yet there were foolish people within the agency that thought we can get up and running in 6 weeks. And I thought this was crazy, and it wasn't true.
6, 5, 3 engines up and burning. 3, 2, 1, and liftoff of Space Shuttle Discovery, beginning America's new journey to the moon, Mars, and beyond. And the vehicle has cleared the tower.
It took us about 2.5 years to get back up and flying humans in space, just like almost the same amount of time when we lost the crew on Challenger. And so came back to the United States, and I told my boss, you know, I don't need to be an astronaut. I've been working for 22 years as a researcher, and I knew almost everyone that knew anything about space and the technology, the key people around the United States that we needed to put together to figure out what caused the problem and to make sure we never do this again. When people at Johnson Space Flight Center were totally struggling, they didn't know what they were doing. We did not have the best of the best. These were not researchers that made that decision, and they did not have the right team of people. They did not know what they were talking about. They were not the experts in impact and damage assessment to the reinforced carbon-carbon wing leading edge. I worked with those people at NASA Langley. I worked with those people at Glenn Research Center and Ames Research Center. So we had to put together these teams of people, even though the program managers told us not to, because this was the right way to solve the problem, and we did it. And eventually they realized that we needed these people to show these other people how to solve this problem.
T-minus 60 seconds and counting.
And it wasn't pretty. It was ugly how we got back to space, and there was a lot of hard feelings, and there was a lot of mistrust. You know, you say, how could you do it? I felt pretty confident because I worked pretty closely with the people that were developing the new technologies that we were going to be using. Yeah, this was way before I knew I was even going to be assigned to the flight. And so I knew these people, I knew the technology, and so I myself was pretty confident, that we were going to have just as good odds as we would ever have, and we would be able to handle something, even if foam came off and impacted our vehicle, because I was working on repair techniques, and we had developed some repair techniques that we could use in such a case. But there was no trust.
Roger, roll, Discovery.
We had no trust in the ground, which is kind of crazy for a crew. It's hard to imagine, because the crew typically relies on the ground and mission control, and we had this terrible schism between people like myself that knew how bad those people operated when they made that decision, how bad the culture was.
Houston Discovery, we have a good presence.
And so, not many people know this, but our crew, before we went to bed every evening, we had a direct communication with the head of the astronaut office, and no one else was allowed on the line, which is kind of unheard of. The flight directors are in charge in that control room, and they monitor all the communication except for private communication and personal communication with the family and with your doctor. And so they were not happy about that. I also was connected with all the key researchers on the ground. I had their telephone numbers. These were the key people, what I call the Friends of Charlie network, that I relied on to tell me whether or not the information we were getting was correct. And we could call them up from space, and we could talk to you on your cell phone at home with a 3-second delay, and I can ask and inquire directly what the story was. I think STS-114 was the mission, right? 2.5 years. Did we correct the problem? What would happen to the space program if we lost another crew? I seriously doubt the United States would have been jumping up and down to maintain a human spaceflight program.
Coming up on a go for auto sequence start.
It was, the weight of that was on our shoulders. We were flying for the first time and testing this technology, these new technologies, and these procedures to make sure that every flight after us would fly successfully and we would not lose another crew.
Booster ignition and liftoff of the Space Shuttle Discovery, returning to the space station, taking
We felt very responsible. We wanted to be successful. We trained very hard, and we trained with the people on the ground as they were developing these technologies to make sure we would be able to perform perfectly without a hitch on orbit. So yeah, it was very important to us to be successful and to make sure the methods and what we learned we could pass on to the next crew. We had an anomaly on our flight. There was a little piece of a gap filler sticking out from the belly of the vehicle, right near the nose. And it were those same experts that I knew firsthand, that I went to school with, that were these experts in aerothermodynamics that were part of the Friends of Charlie network, that had to basically be called upon to determine was this safe or not.
Houston Discovery has the runway in sight.
Copy, runway.
And thank God we made the right decision. Because of those experts and that expertise, they knew that that would be a problem. If we didn't perform that emergency EVA, we would probably not have survived re-entry.
Nose gear touchdown, and Discovery is home.
Roger, wheel stop, Discovery, and congratulations on a truly spectacular test flight. Stevie Ray, Soichi, Andy, Vegas, Charlie, Wendy, and Eileen, welcome home, friends.